Okay.
Welcome to the Delingpod with me, James Delingpole. And I know I always say I'm excited about this week's special guest, but I really am. I spotted this man on Twitter, and so did lots of you. Lots of you said to me, oh my God, you've got to get this man on your podcast now. And normally I'm really slow about these things, but today I've got my act together and I've got hold of Josh. Josh, welcome to the Delingpod. Just what's your Twitter handle? Where did you put out this brilliant video you made?
I actually didn't put it up on Twitter. My Twitter account has been pretty inactive, I'd say, for a while. I used to be a musician and stuff, and I had the Twitter from years and years back. But then I basically released a video through Telegram.
Oh, yes.
I was using the Telegram app, and I think somebody just got hold of it and shared it throughout Twitter. I kind of lost faith in Twitter a few years ago. It just seems to be this kind of delusional biosphere of, radical lefties that just don't seem to come to terms with the reality of the world, So I don't engage too often, but every now and again, I've just poked my nose in,
It's quite interesting because like one of the things I like about having you on the podcast is that you are, to all intents and purposes, a civilian. Normally I get my guests from this coterie of vaguely prominent skeptics and dissidents of one kind or another. But you're here representing real Britain. I think there are lots of people like you out there who are mightily pissed off with what's happened to their country, and we'll come to that at the moment. But even what you said about Twitter, so many people are going to be going, yeah, exactly, because like you, I tend to prefer Telegram now. I like the fact that it was invented by the Ruskies. Something I find that reassuring somehow. They seem to be less tainted than this whole corrupt. Isn't it bizarre that the Russians are now kind of almost less tainted than the whole corrupt Western, all the Western institutions have been compromised in some way. And yeah, Telegram's good. Twitter, I use it out of habit, really. It's just, I've got something like I don't know, nearly 50,000, I mean less now, followers from there, and it's kind of quite a useful vestigial communication tool. But yeah, I think we need to migrate elsewhere. Anyway, so you put up this video on Telegram, and before we go on, you must tell me about yourself. You were a musician. What kind of a rock musician?
No, I mean I've had quite a few roles in society. I left school straight out of secondary school and ended up joining the military. And I was in the military for about 6 years. And then after that, I got a job naturally working in a gym doing circuit training and things like that.
Yeah.
And I'd always wanted to play an instrument. And I, at the time, was living in a place called Gosport on the south coast. I don't know if you know it, but for lack of a better term, it was a shithole. And I wanted to play the drums because I played the drums when I was younger. And sort of my neighbours came around and said, if you play that drum kit anymore, I'm going to stab you. So basically, I had to come up with something else. So I got a guitar, and you could play guitar with headphones on. And I started playing music and writing songs. And somebody said to me, I'll give you 150 quid if you come and play in my pub on Friday night. And I was like, 150 quid? Yes, please. And I thought, well, if I could get 3 or 4 of these, then that would be great. And it just went from there, really. And it kind of skyrocketed. I ended up getting signed. I have still now publishing deals on various songs. One of my songs recently, an EDM track, has got 6 million what do you call them, listens, I suppose, on Spotify, which is really quite an interesting thing, because I wrote that song because I don't really like electronic dance music. I sort of wrote it as a sort of cliche, like this is how to write a crappy 5-minute song, what we would call a hook line, and it ended up coming this really popular sort of summer dance hit on Spotify, and there you go. But anyway, yeah, so I was kind of doing the music for a bit, and then I started going over to France and playing my music in the French Alps. So I was snowboarding every day. I towed a caravan with me, and I had a little dog. I had a big dog called Rudy, and he came with me, and we just slept in the caravan, snowboarded every day, and then played music in bars. And I just started chatting to people and getting lots of contacts, meeting great people. And I did that for about 5 or so years. And then in the summers, I was kind of using the money that I earned from doing that to learn new skills. And I eventually just got myself into welding and fabricating, because I've always enjoyed making things with my hands. And I come from a long line of farriers, actually, believe it or not. And so I always wanted to work with metal. Yeah, and so I always wanted to work with metal. And so, yeah, I got into welding and fabrication, walked into a workshop and basically said to the guy, I'm not after your money or a job. I just want to learn this trade. And here's some of my welding I've done so far. And he said, well, there's a pile of scrap in the corner there. If you can produce a weld that I can sell, I'll give you a job. And that's how it went, basically. And I was working for him for quite a while. Then eventually the first lockdown happened and the work started to dry up, because we were building parts for super yachts. I mainly worked with stainless steel as a TIG welder. And some of the contractors for super yachts that we were working for had to shut down their factories because people were testing positive, and they had like an A team and a B team if someone tested positive. And basically it was just affecting this production line of the things that we were making. And because I was the last one in the door, I was sort of the first one out. And so I had to go on this job hunt again. And then I found a new firm, and I was doing all this site work on building sites. And that really opened my eyes, because I was going around to these houses and they were just decimating woodland and just building just thousands of really poor matchbox houses everywhere. And I thought, bloody hell, I'm contributing to this at the moment. And this is scaring me, because who are these houses for? Like, what is this all for? I don't like the quality. And I was on the building sites as well. And the large majority of people that work on building sites aren't actually English. And what I was doing was building staircases. So more often than not, we'd have to remove the temporary staircase that was there. And you'd put signs up saying, don't come down the staircase. But a lot of these people can't even read the sign. So that's when I kind of started to get into this place where I thought I got to start speaking out about this sort of thing, because there's got to be an element of health and safety and whatnot. And yeah, I started my channel. I basically just used my YouTube channel that I'd had from the music before, and just started speaking about my own personal experiences. And I always said to myself, look, I never want to advocate for, any violence or anything like that, but I just don't want to live in this country where you can't speak your mind. I just want to be able to speak my mind and also stand up for my own people. I'm English. That's my ethnicity. And this is England. And I'm going to speak about that. So, I'm not an aristocrat or an intellectual or anything. I'm just a welder. And I can only speak from that perspective.
Wow. There's so much there to talk about. I mean, starting with your time in the Alps, living the dream, snowboarding and making music. I mean, how many of us that belongs to an age that we've almost lost, doesn't it? That really, and until last year, this would have been the dream of every young man. I'm gonna grow my hair long and just spend some time out boarding, and oh God. But you couldn't do that now. I mean, how would you couldn't even get on the airplane, you or not without going through this rigorous quarantine procedure. And then can I just ask you briefly about farrier? Is it farriers who do put shoes on horses, or is that blacksmiths? I always forget the
farriers works with horses specifically, with horseshoes.
Yeah. You see, I love that, because I'm really into horses. And
that's great.
But the horrible smell of burnt hoof when the horses are having their shoes replaced. Can you do horseshoes, or is that not in your skill set?
I've never done it, but I imagine I probably could. It's something I'd love to try. If there's any blacksmiths listening in who want to give me a shot, I'd love to come and have a go and kind of rekindle that part of my lineage. I would love that.
I bet you'd be good. And also it might become necessary, because this new agrarian age that's going to be imposed on us by the Great Reset and stuff, cars will be banned, and we'll only have horses, which actually I wouldn't mind that particular detail. So you could be in demand.
It's funny because I was going to say my great-grandfather came to London specifically to put horses down, to cull the horses, because of the introduction of the automobile. So there was all these horses around, nobody wanted to keep them, they didn't have a purpose anymore. And my dad tells me stories about when he was a little boy sitting up on his cart taking horses to the slaughter, as a 5-year-old boy or whatever in East London.
There's a bit of forgotten history. I mean, I knew that in the run up to the sort of development of the automobile, there was this great concern. I think towards the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, there was a great concern in metropolises across the world of how they were going to cope with the massive increase in the amount of horse shit in the streets, because it was a real issue at the time. And I think there were discussions about what government intervention can be adopted to deal with this problem. But of course, technology solved the issue. The car came in instead, but the sad consequence of that was horses. You look, by the way, like you could be, sorry, I'm going to insult you here. You could be in Mumford and Sons almost, which would be kind of appropriate to that kind of musician, sort of pikey, rustic horse thing going on. Anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say, I definitely like the outdoor. As I've got older, I now own a wax gilet. I mean, you just cannot beat these clothes. And before the lockdown, I would go into charity shops. And what's great about them is it's old people really know how to dress practically. So if you want practical clothing, those are the places to go. And I always pick up gilets, nice jackets, hats, things like that. And as an Englishman, it's our bread and butter, isn't it?
I've totally gone that way as well, actually. I was just a brief foray into sartorial corner. I've now realized that the only kind of shirt, I used to wear these kind of floral Paul Smith shirts, and they look poncy. Yet, particularly when you're a sort of middle-aged man. Middle-aged men they're lovely to look at, they're lovely on the rack, but when you put them on, you just look like a middle-aged ponce in a floral shirt. What a man needs beyond a certain age, actually, and probably you can start in your my son looks brilliant in them, much better than me, is this kind of pocket, it's called pocket check. It's like a smaller version of Tattersall check. And it's just like goes with everything. And I'm wearing this Bernard Weatherall kind of shooting, sage colored shooting top. I'm really happy in country wear. It's just the best. I think it's proper for an Englishman.
Absolutely. I think it's a gentleman's prerogative, absolutely, to look a bit sharp all the time. Or as my dad would used to say, you know what, son, it's nothing wrong with looking a bit, and he would click the fingers.
Well, your dad's absolutely right. So tell me, Gosport, that suggests to me that you might have been in one of the naval branches of the services. Were you a Marine or in the Navy or not?
Yes, I started off in the Royal Navy. I wanted to be in the Marines all the time, and I went into the careers office. And I can remember having this conversation because I was supposed to stay behind after school in order to go to college. And I was so anti-school at the time. I was like, I'm not staying behind after school. And I remember coming home and my parents were like, well, what are you going to do then if you're not going to college? And they said, and I said, oh, I don't know, I guess I'll just join the army or something. And they were like, Josh, you don't have the discipline for that. You can't do that. You don't realize what you're doing. And I went into the careers office. I said, right, what is the hardest one to get into? And they said, well, the Royal Marines Commandos course is the longest, hardest training in the world. So I was like, right, sign me up. But at the time, I was boxing. I've always been a boxer. I love mixed martial arts and things like that. And I was weighing in when I was 15 at literally, I think I was about 50 kilos, which is nothing. And you have to be 64 kilos to join the Royal Marines because of the training. So they said, what you can do is join the Navy, get a bit of military bearing. And when you're a bit older and heavier, then branch transfer across because the Marines are a branch within the Navy. And that's what I ended up doing. So I did a few years in the Royal Navy, sailed around the world. I was on HMS York for a while, did some op tours and got promoted. And then I got recommended for branch transfer to the Marines and went off and did that. So all in all, my service was about 6 years. And what for me, it was one of those things where I really loved it. I don't regret it, but I found it very difficult to sort of plan my life. You have to be in there 100% or nothing. And it was a very difficult transition to come from the military back into Civvy Street. And I think that's why a lot of those guys end up homeless. And I've certainly been in some pretty dire situations in my life before as well. It's good just purely because it is such a difficult transition for people to make. But yeah, sorry.
How did you find the commando training? I mean, to get your Green Beret.
Well, it's the hardest thing to do. It's very, very difficult. It's like I said, the longest, hardest training in the world. But I think it just gets to a point after a while where there's only one person that could kind of kick you off that course or fail that course, and that's yourself. The whole thing is I suppose, as a battle with your own self. I always do it like when I'm running now, and I think most people could relate to this in your life, where you tend to just have sort of binary thinking process where you have two voices in your head, one voice telling you should do something and one voice telling you shouldn't, and you have to choose the right voice to listen to and keep pushing. I run all the time, and a lot of my videos are filmed whilst I'm running because I think it releases all these endorphins. It's very, very good for thinking. It's the same with walking as well. If you're not into running, just being outdoors, fresh air, in the woodlands, running by the sea, or whatever it is you've got. I just find that what that does is it teaches you to listen to the right voice and helps you to become more determined as a person. And overall, it's just really brilliant for your health. So that's why my videos are kind of focusing around that.
I so totally agree with you about everything there. I do about 20 miles a week. I'm having a relapse of my Lyme disease at the moment, so I've knocked it on the head for a while. But I generally do about 20 miles a week, and walking, I think, is running is great, endorphins and stuff. I don't wear headphones. Do you? I quite like being left with my own thoughts rather than having.
It depends. I do sometimes, yes, but sometimes no. I am of the camp of thinking that listening to music whilst running is a bit cheating, and if you're out walking listening for headphones, then it's a dreadful shame.
That's wrong.
Nature provides the soundtrack for your walk, and that it's an insult to your very being to suggest otherwise. So yeah, running, sometimes I do it if I'm going for a particularly arduous run, then I might have some music playing or whatever. It's a little bit of a cheat, but I also remind myself.
Eye of the tiger.
No, do you know what? My music, it's one of those things, if you run quite a lot, you get bored of the same playlist.
Yeah.
And I've gone through so much. It's quite an eclectic mix of music on my phone now. I actually have like a Mongolian throat singing on there. It's like all sorts on there to listen to. Yeah, well, it's really good sort of war music. So when you're running, it's quite it helps you to be quite enthusiastic and keep going, but helps with the determination of the thing.
Okay, I'll check out this Mongolian throat music next time I'm out for a run. But yeah, walking, I agree. I have the best conversations with people when I walk with them. I mean, if I were ever going to have a sort of business meeting with somebody, I'd want to take them for a 5-mile walk, and it clears your head, and you can communicate in a way that you can't sitting around a boardroom table. Not that I would know what a boardroom table look like particularly, but you know what I mean. It's great. Yeah, and you made that video, of course, while you were running, which was great. I don't know how you can get your breathing right, like where you can talk and run at the same time. Is that Commando Training?
No, certainly not. It's been such a long time now since I've left. It would be unfair of me to credit any of my physical attributes to training I did such a long time ago. But it's one of those things. I think if you run enough, you get like a base level pace that you can run at. And sometimes I practice just running uphill and holding my breath for as long as I can. It's very good to improve your VO2 max and make your muscles more efficient at working without having as much oxygen as they would like. I think training in general is about taking your body outside of its comfort zone. Once you do that, obviously it then tries to change to become better, and that's the whole point. So there's always these little tricks you can do, and so the videos help me vent my frustrations at the world, but also they help me on a physical level by improving my VO2 max as well.
So before we move on to politics and the shit show in which we find ourselves, when you were in the Marines, did you do any tours of duty abroad?
I've done Optelic 11 before. I did some like operations like anti-piracy and bits and bobs like that.
Mali pirates, things like that? Yeah,
yes, bits and bobs like that. I was in Opgina as well, which was like evacuation of British citizens from, I don't know if you remember, Israel and Lebanon back in 2006.
Oh yeah.
So doing bits and bobs really. I was very lucky, but because I was so into boxing, I spent a bit of time with the boxing squad doing that as well. So I don't really know. I was much more into the sport than the kind of military side of it, I have to say.
Yeah.
And if you are a young person watching, or a person that's always thought about joining the forces and you play sport, it's still really the best place to be, because it doesn't matter if you join the RAF or the Navy, Army, whatever it may be. They always have really good programs of people that are interested in sport. And if you're a good rugby player or football player or whatever, even skiing, motorcycle racing, whatever it is you may be, they tend to have quite good programs for that. I don't know what it's like now. And when I was in, Theresa May was the Home Secretary, and kind of got to the point where she was making lots of people redundant, and they were having there was lots of MOD cutbacks, basically. So yeah. I think when I left, it was a good time to get out.
I think you're probably right. I mean, everything I've read recently suggests that the armed forces have been cut right to the bone. In fact, probably into the bone. You're underpaid.
Don't even get me started about it. It's got this advert, I don't know if you've seen it, where there's this guy, this Muslim guy, who stops in the middle of a patrol to pray, and everyone's just kind of like, right, we better stop what we're doing. It's like, what? That doesn't have a, like, you're there to be a soldier. But when you think about it, objectively speaking, it's very strange that a part of the parcel of the training now, a huge element of that is this diversity training. Yeah. And I have to often ask myself, why, if this is something that should occur so naturally to people, why are we so heavily being trained to be more tolerant of each other? And tolerant is a word that I've grown to detest as of late, because it effectively just means put up with things that you wouldn't normally put up with. That's what tolerance really means. And I hate these politicians who sit there with a smirk on their face as they dilute and subvert our English culture, and call it diversity, and that is a positive thing. And they'd call people like me a supremacist. People called me a supremacist before. That's simply not the case. I think it's a very supremacist idea to think that you could defeat a virus and that you could lift the entire globe out of world poverty and then keep it forever that way. Those are totalitarian supremacy ideas, not what I'm saying. I just love my own people. And just because I love my own people doesn't necessarily mean then I hate everybody else. My ideology about peoples is that I think that everybody should have the right to their own homeland, and those people should determine the future of their own homelands. You know, if I go on holiday to India, I would like to see Indian culture. You know, if I go to New Zealand, you know, I want to see the Maori and I want to see that. And when people come to England on holiday, I'd like them to see English culture. But if you went into London or Birmingham, Luton, Rotherham, Bradford, all these places now, it doesn't look to me like England anymore. And I think it's a dreadful shame, because we really are great people.
Yeah, it's funny. I've heard myself saying that over the years, and it really oughtn't to need stating. It ought to be so obvious what's not to like about countries having their own special identity. I mean, you're right. I love going to India and seeing all the temples and the statues to, you know, to Ganesh or whatever, and the sadhus.
I agree. And what's really frightening is why would you want to destroy that? So when you think about it, diversity kills diversity. That's what it does. When you localize it in such a way that multiculturalism has, you're basically forcing lots of different people all on top of one another with opposing ideologies, different ideologies, and basically creating these indoctrination programs, these diversity courses and stuff to try and teach people to get on with each other. I think there is such a thing which have a scientific basis as in-group preference. I think people have in-group preference. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It doesn't mean we can't live alongside each other as neighbors, you know, and work together. And it doesn't mean that all these groups should be constantly fighting each other. But I think what's happened is, like the United Nations Migration Compact, for example, when you look at that thing, it really does just suggest the fact that of like almost like a mongrelization of Europe. And we're told regularly that we don't have a culture, that we aren't really a people. And I hear this a lot. You think, oh, especially because I've chosen the white dragon, which is a flag of our ancestors, and people say, "Oh, what culture? What ancestors? You're a bunch of mongrels. You're this tribe. You're that tribe, and blah blah blah." And I just find that bizarre that most of these people are white English people, by the way. You know, that are saying these things.
Yes. Oh, it's definitely university educated, white, middle class people. Probably got jobs in working for the government in something like environmental consultancy or sustainability or diversity or HR. It's just some kind of department, which is some sort of non-job. So they're secure because they're you know, the public sector is safe, and they can mouth all these platitudes that they've picked up at uni probably, and which they think makes them better people. But I'd say that you're more representative of where most of us actually are outside the sort of the media the legacy media echo chamber where these views are bandied about as if they are representative. I don't think they are. I think you are much more. I mean, tell me about how old are you, by the way?
I'm 31.
31. Okay. So your circle of friends, I mean, presumably you've got friends.
Not anymore. No, it's interesting you should say that, because I've met lots of new friends since I became sort of politically active or talking about my political opinions. I think a lot of people are scared to do that. And when you do that in a public sphere, especially put your face on there, you attract a certain group of people that are quite like, oh, it's really great. I mean, I've got in touch with people, or people have got in touch with me that are, it's quite heartbreaking stories. Like, for example, people at university who are like, yeah, I'm quite a proud Englishman, but I wouldn't dare say that in front of my friends at school because otherwise I'll be ostracized, during their studies. And this happens at universities. So universities, my impression of university was supposed to be a place for thinking and debating and discussing ideas. But it seems to me that now, after this long march through the institutions, we have created this vacuum, this kind of like this echo chamber, where if you have the wrong ideas, then you're going to be ostracized. And interestingly, my missus at the moment, she's a nurse, but she's retraining to be a paramedic. Interesting to go back to university at these current times. We can talk a bit more of that in a second. But before she started the course, someone had got in touch with her about something she'd put on Instagram, which was about migrants coming over in rubber dinghies. And my missus is not really that politically minded or whatever. She just thinks that people shouldn't be coming into Britain illegally. But the university called her in for a formal meeting about this post that she'd done before she'd even started the university course, and gave her an informal warning, which is now permanently on her record. And yes, and I just think it is disgusting the way the establishment treats people, and this is the argument that they would use. They would demonize people. I've met doctors that aren't actually allowed to practice anymore because they've said or done something on social media which the establishment doesn't agree with. That's just very slightly outside of the Overton window, perhaps, and it's now affected them. This is why we have now this police state with the thought police. So before the coronavirus happened, people were getting knocks on doors for saying things like trans women aren't women on Twitter, and actually being arrested and detained and interviewed or whatever for a few hours. Posey Parker is a good example of that. And I just find it's bizarre. And this is why I'm doing this march, because I don't want to live in a police state anymore. They could create these rules around me. I don't care. It's not going to change. My rules exist in here. And my parents told me when I was a youngster, they said, as you can do what you want in life, as long as you're not hurting other people, then be free. And do what you feel is right and be true to yourself. And I just look at the data that we have for coronavirus at the moment, and I look at my reality around me, and I've made my own decision about it, and that's why I'm marching, because I want everybody else to have those same feelings and strike out like that.
Yes, well, let's talk about your march, and let's talk about the White Dragon. Was the White Dragon the flag of Wessex, or where's it from?
There's well, basically, it's almost a folklorian symbol, because the legend has it there's a red dragon under Wales and a white dragon living under England, and they had this fight and the white dragon prevailed. And if you look at the times of King Harold, for example, before 1066, the Welsh actually went and chopped off the head of their own king and gave it to Harold Godwinson because they were so impressed by this guy, and that really unified our nation. And I don't think that England would be what it is today had it not been for the Welsh longbowmen. So we needed these huge, powerful, burly men to fire these bows. These longbows are made of ancient yew, a bit of Rudyard Kipling, yew of old and churchyard mould that breedeth the mighty bow. And, they dug up some of these old longbow archers, and their bone density was like 20% denser than anybody else's at the time, all on one side. And I believe that they were able to fire these arrows at a pace of, I think, 16 to 30 arrows a minute, which even today's best archers can't imitate. They can't do it. These were a special breed of people, and those longbows did us a lot of favors at Agincourt and things like that. So really interesting part of our history, but the dragons come into it. The white dragon was a flag of Harold. And a lot of our flags have derived from that. You see the 3 lions from Richard I. Henry III, I believe, had the dragon. And interestingly, now in more modern times, it's all about St. George slaying the dragon. But I actually think the dragon was an important part of our ethnic heritage and where we come from, and where the English people come from, and that's why I've chosen to fly it. As like I said in my video, it's more of a distress signal to other Englishmen that something is awry, and it's time for us to do something.
It totally is awry, and I think you've chosen a great symbol. So tell me about your plan. You're going to walk from John O'Groats to Land's End to John O'Groats, is that right? Or
no, I'm going from the south coast of England, so from somewhere I can see the Isle of Wight. Yes. And then I'm walking up to Hadrian's Wall. I have my own personal reasons for choosing Hadrian's Wall, but I wanted somewhere very far north, so I could walk almost the entirety of the country with that symbol and then wave it when I got there. It's a really long and arduous journey, and I'm not going to actually announce when and where I'm doing it or what route I'm going to take. And I've got some close friends of mine that are busy as we speak, helping me plan the route and things like that. And the trouble is that my video is getting so much attention now that I believe there'll be a lot of people out there, including the state and the police and stuff, that will try and stop me from doing it. So I kind of almost have to make my way up there.
But at the same time, what about if we want to join you? What about, I mean, surely a lot of us are going to be wanting to walk legs of the journey with you.
My worry there is that I would love it. I don't want to do it alone. I'll be honest with you. It'd be nice to have some company. It's a long old way. But my worry would be that if people march with me, it's 350 miles as the crow flies. It's a long, long march. And there's only a certain group of people that probably would be up to that. And of those people, what I would fear is that the police would just turn up, would be easily recognizable, and just start arresting people. And it would, I believe our system works very much like an immune system. So basically, every time something rises up in rebellion to that immune system, it creates antibodies and then stamps that thing out. Yeah. So if we create a movement, even if there's 2,000 or 3,000 people that want to do this march, the state will respond accordingly. It'd be much easier for one man to dart up his way up the country, or for singular individuals to make their way to one place from different corners of this nation, and all meet and do that. If you move as one body, then you run the risk of being met with another body, which has got more power than we do.
Well, it's certainly true that the police are becoming more and more, we do live in a police state, as you say, they're becoming more and more draconian. You saw that appalling footage, I'm sure, of police, Greater Manchester police, beating up a Polish guy who'd opened who for the crime of opening his cafe. That shocked me. I've seen and I've heard of anti-lockdown rallies being brutalized by the police in the way that Black Lives Matter and Extinction Rebellion never were, because they were pushing at an open door, because the establishment is now woke and they want to push the woke agenda. But if you protest against arbitrary government power being used to kind of keep us all like serfs, then the government doesn't like that. So I can see your concerns, but I just wonder. I mean, you say you're doing your thing. Are you going to make a video of it, or what? How are you going to?
Yeah. So I'm basically going to be taking like my Bergen with me, and a sleeping bag, bivy bag, roll mat, that kind of thing, and just basically dossing it as I go, and using wood blocks and other things like that, and for cover. And I will be documenting my journey, and then I will release the footage and stuff after the fact. So I have people that are helping me, that are going to resupply me as I go and things like that up the country. Surprisingly, there's more northerners that are willing to help me than southerners. So
that doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me. I mean,
me neither.
It's been, don't you think this whole experience has been quite revealing, not just of individuals, for example, I'm about the only conservative commentator left. I mean, if you want to describe me as a conservative, I'm not sure you would, but I mean, almost all of them have fled the field and shit the bed on the subject of what's happening, you know, not just in America, where they denied that the election was stolen. I mean, you know, despite the copious evidence, but over here, the fact that a kind of bad flu year has been turned into an excuse for totalitarian domination of a once free country. It's extraordinary. But
well,
also,
never let a I was going to say, never let a good crisis go to waste, and the Tories have certainly done a good job of that, haven't they?
They have. I mean, all those people, you know, I used to occasionally over the years describe myself as a Tory or as a Conservative, and I think they're just a bunch of crooks. They're only in it themselves. It's extraordinary.
I mean, I could talk for hours about how I loathe the Tories, but I could also talk for hours about how I loathe the Labour Party. What people need to understand is that we live in a political false dichotomy. The left and right is no longer relevant to modern times, and the Conservatives conserve nothing. They conserve nothing. They don't care about our culture or preserving any of our landmarks or our statues and things like that. Otherwise, they wouldn't have let Black Lives Matter run rampant, pulling them down.
Yes.
And they don't care about our history and our heritage and our culture. They're not teaching it in our schools. Lots of people would message me about the flag of the white dragon because they didn't know what it was. And it's a Saxon flag. We're like, people from East Anglia don't know what Anglians are, Angles and Saxons and Engels and Jutes and all this kind of stuff. They don't know because they're not taught it, and there's no onus on their own heritage. Because I think the establishment is scared of Englishmen unifying under their ethnicity. That would be terrifying for them. Because once we did that, we would understand exactly where we come from, what we're capable of, and that would pose a big, big threat to their narratives, to what they're trying to achieve. And I honestly think that's what's happening. This democracy that we live in, to me, is more of a delusion, more of an illusion of control. It's an illusion because our governments capitulate to the world banks, and then we have to beg our governments for the scraps afterwards. You know, look at our banking system. The whole banking system is designed using a language that you're not supposed to understand. But just look at it for what it is: fractional reserve banking. Look at what that is and tell me that that's morally right, that it's right. Look at what's happened in the stock markets recently with the GameStop. It's one rule for them and another rule for you. And then now is the time to stand up and say, no more, we'll change it. We can reform it. We've done greater things. Where I live on the south coast of England, there were teenage boys racing Spitfires with Merlin engines 350 miles an hour up and down the channel for a laugh. Planes that were so good that this government mounted machine guns on them and used to fight the Germans. You name a 20-year-old lad now that could come up with the idea like a Spitfire. Yeah. Our culture has been completely ruined and subverted by these people. They are our enemies. It's time for us to wake up and realize that.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you. What do you think is going on? I mean, how do you explain the last 12 months?
Well, what a big question that is.
Sorry.
It's one of those things where there's just so many moving parts to this machine.
Yeah.
Lots of different things. It's things like transfer of wealth. We've mentioned the word totalitarian, these draconian rules, this way of controlling people. The biggest tool that's been used is fear. And I'm starting to see that fear spill out onto the streets in the form of people doing this sort of thing when they come near me, and people pushing themselves up against the fence. Or when I'm out running, I've actually come across women who've pushed their prams with children in them out into the road to get around me without really paying much attention to the traffic, because they're more scared of getting close to someone who's quite clearly healthy and running along the road, you know, and endanger their own child. So what do I think is happening? Everything's moving toward this technocracy, this automated system, this new fourth industrial revolution. Like you look at Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, where he's saying things like the year is 2030 and you owe nothing, but don't worry because you'll be happy. And I just wonder how he would feel if we all turned up at his house and took away all of his material possessions and said, well, aren't you happy? Aren't you happy? These people are part of an elite clique. Right? They're part of an elitist group of people. And a lot of the people that control this world, we don't even know their names. The people we know about are the ones that we're supposed to know about. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I just look at the data for what it is. But you can look at simple things like I'm sure lots of people that are watching this might have seen that video where it's all the different news anchors from around the world reading the same story off of the same prompt, the same teleprompter, the same sheet, you know, and that to me proves in itself that there is a global narrative here. There is, I think, what the coronavirus is accelerationism for them. It's the boiling of the frog. And sooner or later, that frog's either going to hop out of the pan, do something, or it's going to die. We are that frog, and we've got to stop it, step up and stop it. Our rights are inalienable. Our freedoms and rights in this country are inalienable. It is our government's responsibility to protect them, not take them away from us. This is their responsibility. It's the same with the police, as you mentioned earlier. A lot of the police today, they don't even understand simple things like the appeals principles. They couldn't understand the law, and it got to the point where you couldn't even use common law anymore. You know, whatever you come up with, these people will legislate against it. And look at some of these laws they've been passing under the table under this distraction of coronavirus. You know, creating laws where they can remove you from your house, remove biological matter from your body. You know, forcefully detain you without reason. I mean, that is crazy. What awful times we live in. And I've got a family and I worry about their future. You know, millions of people across this country.
A 1-year-old, is it?
Yeah.
Hang on, let me just change that light. Is it the light's doing an annoying thing and people will get epileptic fits? Well, they won't, but they'll be annoyed by it.
No worries.
See, when I'm really successful, I'll have a studio crew doing this kind of shit for me. Sorry, you were saying you've got a child on the way. Am I right in thinking? And you've got a toddler now?
Yes, we found out. We found out a few weeks ago. My missus is pregnant again, and we're really over the moon about that. Thank you. There's lots of people across the country that are probably in a similar boat to me, where they're thinking, right, I don't know what the future holds, and perhaps if I just wear this mask and do as I'm told, then maybe this will go away. But this is one of these situations where it all started about flattening the curve for 2 weeks. We're just going to take the pressure off of the NHS. And this man stood up in front of this country, Boris Johnson, and said we were going to lose loved ones and we were going to be using ice rinks as emergency morgues and all this stuff. And people just bought it up. And here we are, almost a year later. The numbers are shockingly low, the mortality rate, so low that our establishment and the media have done their very best efforts to bolster the numbers and to manipulate the figures, all to create fear. So the fundamental question is, you cannot deny, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on or whatever your thoughts are, that the media has been complicit in making this, of creating this nation that is scared, and this nation of fear of each other. You know, our communities have been fractured, decimated, diluted. Everyone's living in fear. There's only one useful tool. That fear is a useful tool for one thing, and that is control. And that is exactly what they are implementing at the moment, a complete and utter, impregnable system of control to automate your life so that you could be happy. You know, it's crazy.
I totally agree with your analysis, and I hope that this is going to strike a chord. There are lots of people out there like us. I mean, you know, just talking to you, I feel right at home. And I met some other people the other day in one of the great reopening groups. Have you joined any of those?
Yes, I've been in a couple. Yeah,
and these are just quite a lot of them have not had their brains ruined by uni. I mean, I think I'm about the only person of my generation, my university generation, who's emerged with his intellectual faculties, his critical faculties intact. So many of them have just. I think I wonder actually. I'm sure this is what Bismarck would have thought of the purpose of education. Bismarck did, after all, sort of invent modern education. It's designed to train the populace to becoming compliant citizens, isn't it? And universities are there.
What's interesting, was going to say, what's interesting about what you just said is I actually get quite a few emails and correspondence with people, and the large majority of people that would feel comfortable in a conversation with the likes of myself and you they're university educated people. They are people in positions of like I don't know. There's doctors, train conductors, pilots, all sorts of people. Like I've had marine biologists get in touch with me. That scientists, people who are truth seekers, and actually what I think the establishment has done very successfully is creating a subservient class of midwittery. It's the midwits that are compliant. The very stupid people at the bottom get it. They can see it. It's everywhere.
Yeah,
that's why football hooligans are always labeled as Nazis and far right nutcases, because they could just see it. They don't need to be intellectually what do you call it? Like they don't need to be like extremely clever to point out. It's like sometimes it takes an idiot to point out the obvious.
Can I just pause you there, Josh? Because so we don't lose that brilliant point you made. I've noticed that there has been a move by the government, and this predates coronavirus, to rebrand people, sort of free-thinking people who believe in England, who are proud of their culture, to rebrand them far right in order to use the oppressive force of the state to crush them, to crush any nascent political movements, kill them at birth. Tommy Robinson being a classic example. I mean, see how they singled him out for destruction because they didn't like what he represented. They didn't like that impulse. And it's not about racism. It's about national pride, and they don't like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people nowadays are very scared of being called racist, and I, for one, am not one of these people, not any longer. I don't care. I'm a race realist. I understand the things like in-group preference and stuff like that. And as I said to you earlier in the podcast, just because I'm proud of who I am and my ethnicity doesn't mean that I want conflict with other ethnicities and other racial groups on the planet. But it seems to me, if you want to know about white privilege, look at the things that the Black and minority ethnic people are allowed to do in this country, which white people are not. You see, here's the clever trick. Black and minority ethnic means anybody but white. So when they say things like, we need more justice for Black and minority ethnic people, what they actually mean is, we need more justice for people who aren't white. And they've collectivized under this universal banner, but we are not allowed to. And for example, if a person, which we've seen during BLM, marches down the street in what could only be described as a militia, shouting things like Black Power, I look at these things and think, crikey, imagine if I did that with my friends and shouted white power. There's your privilege. Yeah. So white privilege right there. There are things that that BAME people can say in this country which you are not allowed to, and there's your privilege.
I hate to say it, Josh, but you could be one of the politicians of the future to lead us out of this mess. I mean, I bet you don't want to be a politician. But
I certainly hope not. If it boils down to me, I'll be one of those positions where I'm like, how on earth has this come down to me trying to do? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not a politician. But then again, I think the competency of a lot of people in a lot of the MPs we have at the moment, I think, do you agree, when you were younger, you used to just think you'd have these problems and you used to just think, well, there'll be somebody ticking away in the background resolving this issue, or someone's going to come up with an idea to get rid of this. And as you get older, you just realize these people just aren't out there. People aren't actually trying to solve these issues, and it just keeps going further and further, spiraling out of control.
My whole life, my whole journey in life has been a kind of Father Christmas doesn't exist realization, that it was this system that you trusted. You thought, well, MPs, okay, so you get the odd wrong one, but basically they're there to serve their constituents and serve the country. And the law, English common law, it's one of our greatest achievements, and they're going to see justice. That's their imperative. They're not biased, and all these things have been shown to be a business. It's there to create value. It's for the consumer. It's there to, by providing better value than other companies, so they gain market share and they generate profits and they generate value for shareholders. All this stuff is just not true. It's all been taken away from us.
Absolutely, and the onus is on the individual now in capitalism, and that's the worrying thing, because if you become a powerful individual, either with capital through wealth or influence or whatever it may be, all you're doing is reinforcing this idea of separatism between the classes, and I don't think that works. And here's the dangerous thing: if you lean more politically to the right and have more conservative values, to talk about ideas like collectivism and things like that is a very dangerous thing to do, because you're kind of verging on this communism and socialism, or building these communes and stuff like that. I've always been very interested in self-sufficiency as an individual out in the woods, as an outdoorsman, and also collectively in small groups. And I think back to times in England where we used to live in these very small groups. Like you would have like villages. Down the road from me is an old Tudor village, and it's really beautiful down there. There's a war memorial, but they've got all these new buildings going up, and I walk down there sometimes and I think, everything I need to know about what's wrong with this country is right here in this village for me to see. I'm walking past a cottage right now that's called Blacksmith's Cottage. So presumably, once upon a time, a blacksmith would have been able to afford to live there, you know, and now it's a £3.5 million cottage, and I would never have the opportunity to live there. And I would think, if that blacksmith back in the day, he was probably the only blacksmith in that village, and so he could charge a wage, right? If he charges people too much money, they won't use him and he'll go out of business, right? And if he didn't, everyone would think he was a prick, you know, and he'd have to live amongst a small group of people where in which everyone thought he was a prick. And so these kind of little village communities probably worked really, really well, because everybody knew each other. The crime rate was extremely low. People used to, I mean, myself, I grew up in the 90s. I was born in 89. I grew up in a council estate, and everyone used to leave their front doors open. The parents used to natter in the front gardens, and we'd play football on the field. Right now, the field is a bloody car park. I don't know anyone. They're not council houses anymore. They've all been bought up, and they're worth just under £500,000, I think, something like that, for a council house that was built in the 40s or 50s for very little. You know, this is one of the biggest problems here. I honestly don't think that capitalism is the answer for us. There's no control. It requires constant growth, and that's become part of a problem. We need to find a system to control it. And firstly, I think we need to defeat this cronyism that has infected it. There's a huge amounts of cronyism. I don't know what your politics are on economics, and I'm not an economist.
I think we need to distinguish between capitalism and crony capitalism. I mean, apart from anything else, capitalism is actually, it's a Marxist term. It's not, it's loaded in itself. I think what we need to talk about is free markets. I think genuinely free markets are a good thing, because as I suggested before, businesses compete against one another to provide the best value for the consumer, and that's good for everyone. And failing companies go under. You know, it's what Schumpeter called creative destruction. So I don't think free market capitalism is a problem, but we haven't got free market capitalism. That's the real problem. But anyway, we can talk about that another time. Josh, you've been absolutely brilliant, and you're going to strike a chord with so many people. So thank you. It's great hearing somebody so articulate. There are all these people out there who don't appear in the media, who yet who know what's going on, and thank goodness for that. If people want to support your, what are you calling it? Your march, the
March for Freedom.
The March for Freedom. So I think you've set up a crowdfunder or something for it.
I mean, I have. That wasn't my intention, but a close friend of mine basically advised me otherwise. He said, look, if people want to give you money, then you should let them. You're obviously without work at the moment, and there will be costs to doing this march. So if people do want to volunteer some of their money, then you should let them do that, especially if you come into legal complications and ended up needing legal advice and things like that. It might be quite helpful. So I have set something up if people did want to donate, and they can find that on my Twitter, which is @RemedySounds. Also, my Telegram is Lionheart England, and you can find me on there. I don't know what you're like for time, but I did prepare a short little speech that I would have liked to put on here, if you'd allow me a couple of minutes, if that's okay.
Why not? You go for it, Josh.
Excellent. When you stop respecting your history and remembering your forebears, you cease to respect yourself. Remember that you have a debt of honor. If somebody died so that you could be free, or if somebody worked like a dog or suffered like a slave so that you could live in a civilized world, then you owe those men a debt of honor. You might never fully repay it, and neither with your children, but you can do nothing but good in trying. And what could be more beautiful and noble than being the first wave of the movement, the first volunteers that paved the way to victory? So I say, rebel. Rebel against being treated like robots or chattel. Rebel against being just a number or statistic. Rebel against starvation wages, the sale of our sovereignty, and the censorship of our protests. Your own personal rebellion is your duty and your right. This country belongs to us and nobody else. We're not going to give it away, not for free and not for any price. And what about you sat at home now? Have you come out and stood shoulder to shoulder with your brothers and sisters yet? Are you with us? And if not, why not? Don't deal with evil. Fight it. Everywhere you find it, they are monsters and they deserve it. When you look at the statues and read the stories of the greatest men of our history who've made Britain so great, who did their part and more in her time of need, remember this, that you live in such a magnificent time where you are surrounded by enemies, so you cannot miss. All you have to do is strike out. It is our turn. Britain is made up of great nations, great people on great land. It has nothing to do with the state. We exist despite them, not because of them. Most men are living well below their energy or potential. You have more to give, and there is more that you can achieve. So put more work into the movement who is supposed to save Britain for you. No one is going to save Britain for you. If you are ever bored, you know then that you are not in love. A man in love will do anything. The subject of his love will occupy his mind in every unfilled moment, and he will constantly find new and creative ways to show this. Do you love Britain? Do you love your family? Do you love your people? Because I do.
That's fantastic. I so agree with you. Well done. Nice one.
Thank you.
That's really good. I'm glad you said that, Josh. You struck a chord. Well, thank you for listening, everyone. Do support Josh's crowdfunder, and remember, if you like my podcast, to support me on Patreon or Subscribestar. Thank you very much, and yeah, keep fighting the fight, Josh. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.